you some information tonight that will help you in a variety of ways if you ever do come in contact with law enforcement. I think this topic is really important right now because we are coming to terms with the fact that we know very little about how our law enforcement works, and most of us are unprepared interacting with them. When we go to school, we learn civics class about how the three branches of government works and the Supreme Court and the president and the legislature, but we don't really know about one of the most important parts of our Constitution, which is what our rights are when we are being investigated or stopped or arrested. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think that's an accident. I think that a lot of the way that law enforcement works depends on people not knowing their rights, that in many ways it can be more effective if they know more than you do. And so sometimes you have to go to law school to get the basic education that I think all of us should have to be good citizens in this country and to keep ourselves safe. So we have two goals today, though. One of them is to learn your legal rights and police encounters. And the other is a separate topic that I'm going to talk about after we know about the rights you have, which is how to stay safe in those encounters. This is kind of a high level law school 101 primer about the things that you might not know about your constitutional rights, what rights you have, and more importantly, what rights you don't have. These rights are not necessarily what you need to know or be thinking about when you're actually encountering somebody who may be suspecting you with a crime, who may be armed and may be dangerous. And you need to think about a different set of questions when you are in that situation so you can get out safely and deal with this stuff later. So I don't want those two things to blend. It's very important that we have two distinct topics and we'll take them in turn. A little bit about myself before we start. Again, my name is Andrew Biviano. I'm a lawyer here in Spokane, focusing on a civil rights practice. And so a fair amount of my casework involves people who have been wrongfully arrested by the police or detained, how they've been treated in jail, and what things that have happened to them as a result of mistreatment and trying to seek compensation for them. Other things I've done is try to protect people's rights in a criminal case when they might have had the right to stay silent that they didn't. There's all different ways that I've been on this side of the ledger, so to speak, but I also, before being a civil rights lawyer, worked for the federal prosecutor's office for the U.S. attorney. And I did mostly civil work, some prosecution, but the civil work that I did was defending the law enforcement officers when they were sued. So I get to see, I'm really glad I had both experiences, because knowing how a system works from the inside is really enlightening for anybody who wants to deal with it on the outside and know why it works the way it does and how to keep yourself safe and how to keep yourself from falling into a bad situation. So that's what I want to talk about first is the jeopardy you might face when you're with law enforcement from the legal side, how to keep yourself from accidentally getting yourself and facing criminal charges that you didn't want to face or need to face and shouldn't be facing. How to keep yourself, protect your rights if you want to bring a case afterwards, a civil rights lawsuit for a violation of your rights, how to preserve those things so that you didn't accidentally waive the ability to challenge those things later. Those are probably in most people's minds when they're facing police and might be thinking that they're being treated unfairly, is to think, how can I, what do I need to do? What are my constitutional rights right now? And how do I make sure I don't forfeit the right to have this be a legal issue later? And then, like I said, next thing will be, how do we think about doing that in a way that doesn't make a bad situation worse and end up with you harmed? We don't want there to be a monetary judgment, but at the expense of you being hurt or injured or killed. The most important thing is just getting through it alive. And after you do that, you can go talk to a lawyer and see what you can do about righting any wrongs that may have happened. Okay, and so there are basically 5 categories of police contact that we discuss in the legal world, with a little bit of nuances between them, but a lot of similarities, as you'll see. The first is when you're stopped in public as a pedestrian. That's getting more and more common nowadays, as we're seeing a big uptick in political activism and demonstrations and marches. People are encountering police that way because they're usually at the marches and demonstrations. People are often now being more engaged when they see police on the street, arresting somebody else, doing a homeless sweep, talking to a friend of theirs. There's an awareness now that maybe the police should be monitored more by the public. So you're going to see a lot more people interacting that way. And you need to know what you can, and maybe more importantly, what you cannot do in those situations. The one that we think of most often is being pulled over in a car. Whether you're a driver or a passenger, that's most common for most people, is being a speeding ticket or whatever, or something more serious. More serious than that is when the police show up at your door with either with a warrant, or whether it's a search warrant, an arrest warrant, or they just want to talk to you about something and what your rights are there. There's an arrest, the next escalation up, when you're actually being placed under arrest, maybe in handcuffs into a car, what you should be thinking about at that point. And then finally, there's the more aware now of the being a witness to police activity. If you think you're seeing the police abuse somebody, seeing brutality, what you can do to be most helpful in that situation, but without putting yourself at risk. So let's go into the first category, stopped in public when you're a pedestrian. First thing you need to understand is that the police, under our laws and constitution, are allowed to detain you even if you're not under arrest. It's a confusing thing that we're not taught in school. We understand when the police shows that, you're under arrest, right to remain silent, hands behind your back, and that's when they can definitely make you, stay where you are and do what they say. But even if you're just walking by and have done nothing wrong and you don't know what possible reason they could have to talk to you, they still have a right under the law to stop you and detain you, so you're not free to leave. Not under arrest in the sense that you're not maybe a suspect, maybe a witness to a crime, maybe not necessarily a suspect, although you could be for safety, that they feel like they need to stop you for some questions, they can figure out what's going on. And so they can say, I need you to answer some questions. And you're not free to leave. If you try to leave when you're being detained, you could be arrested at that point and charged with a crime of obstruction of a law enforcement officer who has a right to detain you. Now, they might be detaining you for a bad reason. It could be that in your heart and mind that this is BS, that they have no actual legitimate right to detain you, they're harassing you, and that could be the case. In which case, afterwards, you could bring a complaint or a lawsuit because of that unlawful detention. But at the time, you don't get to make that call. A judge has to make that call after the fact. Even if you were trying to leave in a time that was, then you could still be charged with obstruction. So you need to just, as much as it might hurt, stop and listen and do what they're instructing you to the best that you can. You have to follow all their orders to stay there, to sit down, to not leave. And again, like I said, they might be illegal, but don't risk giving them a basis to do more, to arrest you or charge you because you're fleeing or obstructing, or worse, you don't want to let them use force because you're walking away and giving them a reason to tackle you or to think you might have a weapon if you breach somewhere. You want to make sure that you know that your rights are there, but not at that moment. You have to at least stay where you are and do what they say to get through this. Don't lie. Don't give a false name or ID. Sometimes people think I'm not under arrest. It's not a crime to lie. You're not under oath. It is. It's a crime to give a false statement to a law enforcement official. So you can't give them a false name. That's one of the more common things I've seen, is that people don't want to be in the system, so they give them a fake name. And if they find out later that it was fake, that could be a whole basis for charges. Stay calm, keep hands visible, no sudden movements. So again, I'm kind of going back and forth between the safety thing we're going to talk about later, but I want you to know what your rights are right then, which is your right is to, as the next screen will tell you, you have the right to, it's not switching to the next screen. You could go to the next one. The right to remain silent if you'd like. You don't have to speak, but if you do speak, you can't lie. That's kind of the big distinction. So if they are asking you questions, hey, did you see somebody leaving the bar earlier? Did you see a guy walk by here with a green backpack? oh, hey, hey, stop, we want to ask you some questions. You can't just keep walking. You can't just say, forget you. I'm not in trouble. I'm just going to keep walking. They will arrest you if you keep walking by when they're trying to ask you questions. And you can't lie about, no, I don't, my name is, John Doe and I didn't see anything. That's again a crime. But you can say, stop. I don't want to talk to you. I choose not to talk to you. I'm exercising my right to stay silent. And that will probably annoy the officers, but it is a legal right that you have. You don't actually have to answer the questions if you don't want to. We'll get to a discussion later about whether that's a good idea. If it is a basic question, and you need to ask yourself the question of, is this worth antagonizing? If they're just asking, if they're looking for a lost kid, then answer their questions probably, because that's actually a good reason for, to help. But if you feel like it's harassing and you don't feel like it's something you want to participate in, you do have a right to remain silent. You also don't need to ask any questions about immigration status or where you were born, things like that. You may need to identify yourself if they ask. There's some case law that says that if they ask for your name, you are required to give it. The reason for that being that it's not a personal, private thing. You have a government ID. They know your name. You're in the system, and they might need to rule you out that you're not the person that they're looking for. So if they say, what's your name? You can at least give them your first name. And they ask your last name, give them your last name. It's not something that's secret, and just cooperate as best you can while remaining silent on anything that you feel like is too far. So when you're stopped, you need to stop, not leave, not lie, identify yourself, and answer any questions other than that you feel like you want to, but you do have the right at some point to say, I'm done talking. You also do not need to consent to any search of your person or your belongings. Now, this is one that I want to talk to you a little bit about more as far as the legal angle. Later on, we'll talk about your physical safety when dealing with the police. But the second biggest threat you might have to your interests are the fact that they search you and they find anything that they want to charge you with. As a result of that, you could be facing some serious criminal charges. Now, normally to search somebody, the police need to have, there's a whole, class they take, and you learn in law school, and the judges have to know this all too, about different standards for when you can do a search. Usually a search warrant. If not a search warrant, then you have to have a search based on probable cause, maybe one based on a search incident to your arrest, and all different justifications they have to have under the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, to make that search legal. And if it's not legal, then later on down the road, any evidence they get from that search can be suppressed, meaning it can't be used against you on any criminal charges. You've all seen that probably on TV or movies, and that's to protect you. However, all of those legal requirements are brushed aside if you've consented to the search. If you consent to the search, they don't need a warrant, they don't need probable cause, they don't need any basis whatsoever. They could ask, you gave permission, no constitutional issues whatsoever. And from my time with the U.S. Attorney's Office on the prosecutorial side, I was always stunned by how many times the search was conducted based simply on consent. You wonder, why did that person allow for a search of their person or their car when they knew that there were drugs in there? And the reason is because they didn't think they had a choice. It's not presented as, hey, you don't have to say yes right now, but I'm just wondering if I could, but you certainly have a right to say no. That's not something that they say, hey, I need to search your car. Do you consent? Or do you mind if I look in your trunk? Can I pat you down for a minute? And if authority figure and you don't want to say no, it feels like you'll get through this faster if you just say yes to everything. But you don't have to. If you say no, they have to come up with a reason to do so. And they might do so anyway. They might decide that they have enough grounds to do so on probable cause. They might get a warrant. And if that happens, then later on afterwards, you have some very interesting legal arguments that I've been a part of about whether they actually did have sufficient legal basis and a judge will rule whether that's the case. And in some cases, keep the evidence, keep the results out of evidence. But if you consented, there's no argument. It's done. So there's an argument maybe about knowing consent, but I've never seen that work. So you do need to know that if you're stopped, you need to remain there. You need to identify yourself. You need to not lie. You need to cooperate as much as you feel like is reasonable. You have the right to remain silent. And if they ask you to search you, you can say no, whether it's you or your car or your backpack or whatever. They might still do so, but again, let's go to the next page. Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah, we've got one question in the chat. Someone is asking, is all of this still in the process of being?
Yeah, this is when they're asking for your consent. If they arrest you, they won't be asking for the same level of permission. So the question was, is all this in the process of being detained versus the next level of being arrested? And the answer is yes. This is all, the arrest happens usually at the very end of the police interaction. When you first interact with the police, they haven't arrested you, they've just detained you. Whether they pull you over, that's just a detention. That they've flashed your lights, made you pull over, you're being detained by the police, but you're not under arrest yet. If they stop you on the street, you're not under arrest yet. But they're still looking for reasons to arrest you. And so often it's the search in which they find something that then now you're under arrest. And you wouldn't have been if you hadn't given them permission to find the things in question. And sometimes they may have a warrant they're not telling you about, or may have some other basis, but you don't want to make things harder on yourself by like I said before, leaving or giving them some basis to arrest you, but you don't want to make it too easy on them by waiving all your constitutional rights under the Fourth Amendment. So on that, I hope that answers your question. So pulled over while driving is very similar, but I want to keep a couple caveats that come over when you're driving. Same rules as when walking. You can be detained. That's what flashing lights do. And have to stay with them for as long as required. When you're driving, you must produce your driver's license. That makes sense that it's a law that says you can't drive without one. So the fact that you're behind the wheel of a car means that you have to produce that on demand. That's one of the things you agree to when you get your license. So you can't say, I choose not to identify myself because you're driving. And it has to be a license too, not just an ID that isn't a license. If you're a passenger, you can ask to be allowed to leave, because when a car is being pulled over, only the driver is usually the one being detained, the driver who committed the infraction or whatever. And if you're just there, it's kind of like walking by somebody on the street. If you're walking with your friend and your friends get stopped by the police, you're not necessarily stopped yourself. But again, you want to ask. Legally, they need a basis to make you stay, a suspicion that you did something wrong. Sometimes they do. If they think that you're running drugs in your car, then everyone in the car might be part of that suspicion. But if it's a moving infraction, then only the driver is the one that has any suspicion on that. So if you feel like you're in a place where you'd like to just hoof it the rest of the way, you can ask. But don't just get out and start walking, because that could be seen by the police as a justification for you're fleeing the scene because you have done something wrong, and they might stop you just for that basis. Again, as always, remember your right to remain silent, and you're not required to consent to search. Driving is the most likely place for them to ask to search your car, to search you. They don't often ask to search your person. They might ask to search a bag, but the mind if we look in your trunk question is pretty common on traffic stops. And people generally want to say yes, because they feel like if you say no, that indicates that you're hiding something. And so you're nothing to hide here, officer. I'm a law-abiding citizen. Go look, but you don't have to. And if you said no, they have to then take the next step of figuring out a basis to search if they want to, or they might let it go. Okay, next one. No, avoid risk if you can while driving. Stop the car in a safe place as quickly as possible. Safe, I mean, as far as traffic goes, you don't want to necessarily pull off if there's no shoulder, but quickly. If you are seen by the police as not pulling over that might be considered like an eluding type charge. If you, even in your mind, you're thinking, I just need to have a well-lit place in a parking lot somewhere that would be an easier place to have this interaction. And in the police's mind, it's get over as soon as you're able to physically, and you're not actually impeding traffic. So that's why I see people at the shoulder of the highway, which is not a great place to have this happen. It's dangerous for the police and you for trucks coming by, but they want you to get over as soon as possible. And I've experienced that myself personally. I got pulled over one time. I went for another half a mile till I thought was a good place. The officer was furious with me, and it went much worse than it would have been because I thought I was doing him a favor by getting into a parking lot right on the side of the road, but he was thinking I was not obeying his instruction. So don't do that. So when you get pulled over, you turn off the car, turn on the internal light if you need to, especially if it's dark. You want to let the officer see who's in there and see that as he's approaching what's going on, so that there's less of a fear. The officer in that situation is often very anxious, very fearful. They're heard stories their entire careers about how you don't know who you're pulling over. It could be somebody who's in the mob who's going to shoot as soon as you get to the window. You could be finding somebody who's got a body in the trunk who's a mass murderer and you don't know. So they're very, very nervous. So often they don't look that way. So you want to do everything you can to soothe their nerves about approaching a stranger. So turn on the internal light, open the window part way so they can hear you and you can hear them. I don't need to do it all the way in case if you want some sort of barrier between the two of you. Place your hands on the wheel. And if you're a passenger seat, put your hands on the dashboard. Again, both things to make them not have a basis to say that you were a threat to them, a danger to them, or they didn't know where your hands were. You could have had a gun. So you're showing yourself as a non-threatening person who's just there to cooperate and answer their questions. Upon your request, show your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. If you can, have that done before they've even gotten to the door. If you're getting pulled over and you can get it quickly from the glove box, have it ready on your lap before they arrive. Don't do it when there are officers at your window without conferring that he knows that's what you're doing. The last thing an officer wants to see with the stranger I just talked about, them being nervous, not seeing your hands is bad. Having you lunge for the glove box is worse. In your mind, you're just trying to help them cooperate and grab there, especially because people do it quickly. They're nervous. And they go, oh yeah, what? And they just jump into the glove box. That is a recipe for disaster. And the officer who sees it as a threat could do something dangerous. So if you haven't had it already, he says, do you have your license registration? You can say, my license is here. Is it okay if I get into my glove box to get the registration? And he would say, sure. And then do it slowly so he can see what you're doing and pull it out. It's that sort of sudden movements and your hands not being where they can see them that is a very dangerous situation. Okay. Next one is police at your door. You have the most legal protection in this area because unlike the car situation in which you're seen to be in public, there's no protection of your car. You have to have permission to drive a car in the first place, so you have less legal rights. When you're in your home, the Constitution is the most protective. It's the castle doctrine. It was the biggest thing that the founding fathers wanted to protect because the king was regularly, would have the British troops just break into someone's house and search however they wanted to do. And that was their main interest in the Fourth Amendment. So they do need a warrant to conduct a search of your home. They need an arrest warrant to arrest someone in their home. They can't just decide that they, unlike a person on the street where they just detain you, they can't just go to a house and detain you and ask to, just walk in because they're curious. Now, again, they may ask permission to come in and they might ask you to come out. You have the right to say no if they don't have a basis to do that. They might say they have a warrant and that they are going to come in anyway. They're going to bring you out anyway. But if they're asking you whether you're doing so willingly, you have the right to say, this is not consensual. This is not something I'm doing with my consent. And that, again, is just there to protect you for the legal rights, legal argument later, not to waive it by giving them permission. But I don't want you to think that means that it's not going to happen. Those are important distinctions between your rights and your safety. If you can, speak to them through the door, whether the main door or a screen door if you have one. Ask for identification. They should at least show you a badge. Ask to see the warrant if they have one. Now, if they have a warrant or to search or an arrest, and hopefully they have it physically, they can hold it up to the window or slip it under the door. And like a lot of things are electronic nowadays, and they might show it to you on a screen. And if they have it, you have to let them in for the purposes of the warrant. Now, they may not have a warrant. Sometimes they say, we got the warrant, but I can't show it to you. Especially with electronic nowadays, they get the notification that the judge or magistrate has signed it. It's been emailed, but they don't have a printer in their car to show it to you. And they might say, we have a warrant, can't show it to you right now, and they're going to come in. And you don't want to fight them on this physically. Again, you can challenge them later if they were wrong. They may have not have a warrant at all. They may have had the wrong kind of warrant. It could be a different address. It could have been that they had some other mistake in the warrant. It happens not infrequently. And so if all that stuff happens, you do have ability later to either challenge any criminal cases because it was all done without a warrant, and because you didn't waive your rights by consenting to the search, you can still challenge that. You might be able to bring a civil case later for damages because they, again, violated your Fourth Amendment rights by searching your house or, without a warrant. I want you to know those things are possible, but they happen down the road. You litigate those things with lawyers after the fact. You don't get a chance to litigate and debate this with police officers who are not going to have that discussion with you. This is not up for debate. This is not like a moment of persuasion. Your job is to protect and preserve as many rights as you can by not giving consent to things that you don't want to consent to, but you also need to comply where you have to keep these things from getting to be physical or violent or facing criminal charges for obstruction that would be much more harder to fight than you would have had to otherwise. You know, it could be that they didn't have a warrant, that everything was their mistake for being there in the first place, but you now face a charge anyway for having obstructed, or they consider it an assault if you physically prevent them from coming in or things like that. So you need to make sure that there's a understanding that the time and the place to challenge these things is not now. Preserve your rights now, challenge it later, get through this bad event as quickly and as harmlessly as possible. Yeah.
So, there we go. In the chat, someone asked, can they search if it's just an arrest warrant? Is there a difference between an arrest warrant and a search warrant?
Great question. There is a very big difference. They can still do somewhat of a search, but the search has to be only incident to the arrest. So if they have a warrant for your arrest in your own home or somebody else they know to be in that home, and they're going to execute it, they're allowed to go in and arrest that person. The law gives them the ability to do a limited search for their own safety incident to that arrest. It's the term in the law is the lunge area. So if they're going to be approaching somebody in a home, it could be that you have a gun, like in the movies, taped under the table, or in the under the couch or whatever. So they will sometimes say, we're going to approach you and search as much as you could lunge to quickly, and then only for things that could be dangerous. If they happen to discover drugs while doing that, it was legally discovered and could be the basis for later on charges. And then if that happens, there will be litigation probably about whether this actually was in the lunge area, whether this really was incident to the arrest, or were they stretching it too much. Defense attorneys have all sorts of case laws they can bring up about whether that search went too far for the purposes of the arrest warrant. And so that's, again, later on down the road. But if they don't have a search warrant, only an arrest warrant, and once they're arresting that person, they can't search upstairs. That's not legally permissible. They can't search anybody else in the home. They can only search you or the surrounding area to search for weapons. If it's in a search warrant, then they're limited to the things they're searching for. And sometimes a warrant is everything. If they're looking for drugs, for instance, they get to search every nook and cranny where drugs might be held. But if it's, for instance, for a electronic information, they take your computers, your cell phones, but they can't look beyond the electronics that are the subject of the warrant. But again, these things might happen anyway. We're looking at people who, like any other profession, make mistakes, and those mistakes have to be remedied after the fact in court when lawyers say the officer's mistake invalidated the search and everything he found that was beyond the warrant is excluded from evidence. If he goes through and starts to do that stuff, then you have to just grin and not grin, just bear it, and just get your way through the other side and get yourself out of the situation in which danger is possible. If you are, again, if they have a warrant, you have the right to remain silent, even if they have a warrant. You don't need to answer any questions, except those perhaps relating to safety. They can ask you who you are. Again, you can give them your name. You don't have to give them ID, but at least in Washington, some states you do have to give ID upon request. They might ask you if you're armed, if there are any weapons in the house. They have a right to ask those questions because, again, it's for their own safety. They need to know if there's some danger that can make this escalating. And so you might need to tell them, again, who else is in the home. And that's for your safety as well as theirs. If somebody else jumps out later on or just walks in, you don't want anybody who's already tense to get anything that would trigger a self-defense response. So keep things as calm and compliant as possible about the safety of the search, but you don't need to answer any other questions. They say, where is your computer? Show them where the computer is. But you don't need to answer any questions. That's your right to remain silent. And if you're a guest in the home, explain this to the officers and that you don't have authority to let them inside without the homeowner's permission. That's an important caveat. Again, they might come in anyway, but if you've alerted them to the fact that you're a guest and don't have permission, that's legally critical information on the road if they broke the law in doing the search. Okay. If you're arrested, so prepare yourself and your family for this possibility, especially if you're in the line of work as a political activist who might be putting yourself between the police and vulnerable populations, going to homeless sweeps or at a rally, or trying to help out a friend who you think is in danger, or you're just going to be somebody who is on their radar. I know a lot of people in SCAR and other community groups are known to the police and might be more prone to be arrested if the police are looking for a reason. So prepare yourself for this, and it's going to be a bad experience either way, but it's going to be a lot less bad if you're not also taken by a surprise and start to panic, because it is a very disconcerting experience to have. Memorize, if you can, phone numbers for a family member and a lawyer if you have one, hopefully spoken to in advance. Have plans for your kids, your jobs, your medications if you can. Not everyone can plan for this stuff, but if you feel like you're somebody who might be more likely to, who's going to pick up your kids from daycare, whether your job can be called right away, any medications you might need. You cannot bring medications to the jail. They will never let you ingest the medication that was brought to you from outside the jail. They just don't believe, they can't ever trust that that's actually what it is. You could put illegal illicit drugs into a pill bottle because that's marked as a prescription medication. They can't chemically verify that. So they have a strict rule. Only medications that can be taken by anyone in jail are those dispensed by their own pharmacy. So what you need is a prescription taken down or called in to the jail, not your family to show up with the bottle. It will not work. But you need to know what your meds are. You need to know how to get a call in of those meds, the right dose, medication name, to the pharmacy at the jail nurse's line right away. And that's a big mistake people make all the time. Their parents show up. My son got arrested. He needs these medications really badly. And they might have gone through, hell and high water to get them. And it's all for naught because it's not going to do anything. What they should be doing instead is calling the jail, talk to the medical clinic, say, how do I get prescriptions called in? Talk to their pharmacy or their doctor and get the medication and get the prescription called in so they can dispense it to the person who's arrested. Okay. If you're arrested, do not resist. Even if you are certain, 100% positive that it's unfair, that it's illegal, it's retaliatory, you can absolutely file a lawsuit later. That's what I do for a living. It's a right that you have. That's where you get your justice. And maybe, I will tell you the caveat that most of these lawsuits don't succeed. There's a lot of hurdles to overcome. You all know about discretionary defunction immunity or qualified immunity. You're the David against Goliath in that scenario, but you do have a right. And in the best case scenarios, sometimes you can find out that, while it was an unpleasant experience being arrested, you ended up being paid $1,000 per hour for every hour that you spent under arrest. And in that hindsight, you're like, hey, that seems like some justice to me. All that is later. In the moment, your only concern should be for safety. And maybe the thought that I don't need to fight right now because I can fight later, that, oh man, these guys are so violating my rights right now and I can't wait to the lawsuit I get to file next month. That helps you calm yourself and feel less powerless in the situation, then good. That's what I'm hoping to give you today with knowing your rights, is that don't feel like there's nothing else for you to do, that you've got to fight right then and there because it's your only chance to fight back against what you perceive to be unconstitutional and wrong. You have the right to fight back later, which I'm hoping can soothe the frustration of the moment to let you be a little bit more zen and follow the process through to the end so that you can get to the place where you can fight back. If you resist, that's going to, number one, be a huge likelihood of you getting hurt. Just even resisting handcuffs behind your back and pushing back against the officer can be the basis for finding yourself with a dislocated rotator cuff in a quick moment, finding your face in the pavement with the scrapes and maybe cracked bones, because they then get to justify themselves as if someone's physically resisting them. They have their own physical concerns or their own safety. If you're fighting them, then maybe you're going to take a swing at them. Maybe you're armed and they're trained. They don't receive this training. They receive the training about how to keep themselves safe. They don't receive a training about how to protect your rights and your safety. They receive a training about how to protect their own safety. And so do not be fighting physically or verbally. Follow all commands, even if they seem arbitrary or illegal. Safety. Again, stay silent as much as you can. Give them your name. You can give them their ID if you feel like that's easier, if you have it on you. But that's all that's required. Do not try to talk them out of it. Don't fight with them, argue with them. Don't give explanations or excuses. Don't call them jerks or fascists or things like that, or say that this is BS or all those things will only be used against you. They can, as you see from the TV shows, you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. That's true. And they're going to write a report afterwards in which they write down what you said that might be of note. And it could be incriminating. We don't even know about, because it could be an element to the offense they're going to charge you with later. And by saying it out loud, that you're showing that some intent. And even if not incriminating, it could still be infuriating and make people treat you more harshly, make the prosecutor more likely to charge you instead of letting the charges go. Because if you were compliant, they might say, this is a case I don't want to do right now. I've got enough on my plate. I don't need to do an obstruction charge with somebody who seems like they are a good person and learned their lesson. But if they get the report that says that you called the officer bleep, 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 and that you're going to make them all pay, and you guys are a bunch of fascist pigs, the prosecutor might say, you know what, this person is not someone I want to let go. Let's see this through to the end. So you haven't done yourself any favors by talking more. Ask for a lawyer. You have a right to a free one if you're under arrest. Don't say or sign anything without a lawyer. You've seen that from the TV shows also, that they're going to keep perhaps talking to you and asking you questions and hoping you'll just answer, but assert your right to a lawyer. If your rights are violated, so if you're pretty sure that you've been wrongfully arrested with no real basis, that this might be retaliation, that might be targeted, you might be being harassed, if you're physically injured, again, your focus should be on safety first. Seek medical care immediately if you can, if it's needed, and getting yourself into a safe place where you're not in any more risk of harm. Get home, be with loved ones. Then, after you're safe, if you really want to make sure you preserve your rights to seek legal recompense for your rights being violated, preserve all the evidence and recollections that you can. So if you've been injured, take photos of the bruises, of the scrapes, write everything down that you can remember. It fades very quickly, so quickly, make the names, the badges, numbers, the agency you're dealing with, what happened, who said what, so you have some sort of statement of your own. The police are making their statement that same day before they go home. They'll have done a report about what happened. So if you can do your own report, while it's still fresh, that's useful. Get contact info for any witnesses that might have seen what happened before they fade into obscurity and you can't find them again. And then if you'd like to, file a written complaint with the agency, just to feel better, I wrote, because I can't guarantee that's going to go anywhere. You can do that. You can you can go to the ombuds if you want to do something that you feel like the agency, the police department or sheriff might not do anything with. You can do that. And then you can talk to lawyers for legal help and see what kind of things you can do. You can file a public records request later on to see that the truth is really out there if you need to. But again, this is things you do after you're safe. Thinking of like a lawyer at that point, okay, I've gotten through this. How do I preserve my case so I can make the best case possible later on? Then this is an important point. This is happening more and more often, especially after George Floyd and the many witnesses that watched his murder, and the young women that filmed it changed the world because the statement from the police was completely false about what happened. They made false statements about what George was doing and what the police were doing and the basis for why they did what they did, and acted like it was some sort of medical issue. And her recording it, she won the Pulitzer Prize for it actually, was the key to everything. And so more and more people are realizing that it's important to make that independent recording, even with police having body cams. There might not be on, and their perspective is not going to show the full story of what happened. So it is a valuable service to record the police. And the Supreme Court has made very clear that you have an absolute First Amendment right to record the police and the use and their exercise of their duties in public, as long as you are not obstructing what they're doing. So the key to doing this safely for yourself is to stand at a safe distance away, first and foremost. You have to make sure you're not in the area of what's going on that they could feel like. And I want you to emphasize this, it's not farther away than you think it might be. You might only be a few feet away, so you're not actually physically blocking, but in the police mind, again, it's the lunge thing. If you're close enough that you could suddenly jump in and physically obstruct what they're doing, if you could hit somebody or grab somebody or try to interfere, that's enough for them to say that you are in the way. You need to be at least 10 feet back to make it clear that you're not somebody who can be considered a threat to them, who they can, because they might need to turn your back to you. They don't want to feel like they're in danger because they have to turn around and the person behind them could be jumping on their back or pulling out a weapon. So you have to make them feel as secure as you can and make it clear that you're not giving them a legal justification to arrest you for obstruction. So then as long as you're not interfering, you have the right to record, like I just said. And if it's possible, make it clear that you're recording. Record yourself telling them this. So say on the recording, just to know I'm recording you right now. I'm not obstructing, I'm not interfering. I just need to make a record of what's happening today. So that statement is important for any argument later on down the road about what your intentions were, whether you were there for some other reason. If you're saying, I'm just a citizen who's recording the police, I'm out of the way, if they ask you to move and you do move, that's important. So do that, but I want you to make clear that you're not in the way. That's the most important thing to remember. Now, we're going to go turning now to more of the topics about your own safety, where your rights and your safety don't necessarily go hand in hand. And that's how you speak to the police when you're witnessing arrest or abuse. You have the legal right to yell, criticize, and insult the police. You do. You saw that in action. Again, I hate to bring up the tragedy of George Floyd, but you saw that the people who were filming and on the side were yelling and of course, their exasperation about watching a man's life fade away was coming out, and they didn't face any charges for that. In that situation, they all stayed safe. The situation did not get to where they were now in danger, but so they have a right to do that, and you have the right too. You have the right to watch police arresting somebody and yell at them that they suck, that they're terrible. You can call them names. You can say you guys are the enemy. You can say all the things that you might feel in your heart about the police and the institution of policing, and you have a First Amendment right to say that, as long as you're not making a threat to them or doing anything that could be considered, an actual illegal concern. Most importantly, threats. But it's a big caveat. It's not something that usually is to the benefit of anyone in that situation. If anything, it makes it worse. You're not helping the other person if you're a witness right there. You'll notice that at the trial of Derek Chauvin, his defense attorney used the comments and the anger of the crowd as the justification for why he continued doing with the kneeling on his neck, because he felt like there was risk now, a mob. He had to control the scene. And that is the mindset that is pretty common. If you've got angry people around you, the police are not going to respond with open heart of, oh, well, if you all are mad, let me reconsider my actions right now. They're going to double down too and say, well, if this is more adversarial, I'm getting more adversarial. So if anything, it makes it more likely that the person that you're trying to help will suffer worse consequences. I'm not putting any blame on the witnesses in the George Floyd situation or any other situation that you were, the person who's doing the brutality is to blame there, but you just need to be strategic about the way that you might help that person. And then you're weakening, like I said, you're weakening the case because they might try to use your actions as an excuse to use force. You are potentially putting yourself at risk of arrest, because if you say something that they can interpret as some sort of threat or as obstruction, they might choose to arrest you, even if it's groundless. And even if your charges get dismissed later, that's not helping either. And then lastly, you're making the prosecution more likely and more severe. I know this firsthand, that police and prosecutors see themselves as colleagues. They're all on the same team. The police are the witnesses in the prosecutor's case. They're usually their star witnesses who they work together with a lot. They ask them to do investigations for them, and they need to have a good working relationship. And if the case comes to them with your friend who got arrested, and again, it might have been a minor thing that the prosecutor would have been inclined to just dismiss altogether, or make some sort of deal where it's just stayed pending. If you behave for a year, we'll let it go. But they're told that this is a case in which the police were called all sorts of names and felt like they were at risk, and a big crowd came in and they got the F word and all the other words, and that discretion they have to let something go or not is more likely to be in the not if they don't like the situation. It might feel like the need to teach someone a lesson. So again, your legal right is one thing, but your tactical decision might be the other, okay? And this is a point that I want, just for clarity's sake, to really see the bigger picture, is that your comments and resistance, whether it's verbal or physical, will only bother a good officer who doesn't want to harass you, who doesn't want to make this worse than it is. If it's a officer who just wants to investigate things, ask them questions, and go about his business and have you go about your business and have a good day, who really actually does value your rights, then giving him a hard time will bother him. He'll feel like, hey, this is unfair. I don't want to be treated like this. I'm trying to do my best here. I consider myself a servant of the public, and you're calling me these names bothers me. That he'll bother. That's not who you want to bother. I mean, they might have actually gone a different route, except now they feel provoked. If it's a person that you think they are, if you think this person is acting illegally, who is there to oppress you and to harass you and to find some basis to make your life miserable because of white supremacy or otherwise, to that person, your insults, your comments, your resistance is exactly what they are hoping to get, because that is the basis for them to take it to the next level, to make your life harder. That's justification for using more force, for imposing more charges, for arresting you. That's the process. It starts off as like a simple detention. Hey, where you going? What you doing? They don't have any reason to stop you, but they're going to do a simple thing. The person being arrested responds with anger and resistance. That gives them then a basis to say, hey, why are you being like that? What are you hiding? Why aren't you talking to me? Eventually, if anybody makes any movements, then you got to put some hands on somebody. If the person resists putting hands on somebody, then you got resisting arrest. You can use almost not unlimited, but much more severe force. And if they can then say that you may have been reaching for something, that could be the basis for lethal force. And so staying calm and silent is the only way to avoid playing into the hands of someone who you think might be there to do you harm. You are not helping anything by fighting in that situation. The way to fight, again, like with the Tai Chi approach, is you deflect their rage. You try to stay the calm in the storm to not give them a basis for taking this to the next level. And I don't want to say that this is not my statement on my behalf about what this officer is or is not. I have met officers who are in that first camp. I think that most people would agree are doing it for the right reasons. And those officers are bothered. We all know about, from the news, officers who are not. And Derek Chauvin was not going to be made a better officer, not going to behave better because people fight him. He's somebody that needs to be taken off the street by investigation and political activism. But you're not going to do better when faced with a Derek Chauvin by fighting him, by escalating him, by giving him more reason that he can hurt you. Now, again, you can see that because George Floyd didn't even do anything other than have a claustrophobic anxiety attack in the police car, but that was enough for him to treat as resistance, even though he was wrong and even though he was convicted of it. And then, but you see I'm bringing it up as a mindset of the officer that you're dealing with. Try to do everything you possibly can to remove any justification for them to escalate the situation. Okay, so next. I put this slide in here about the new police reform laws because it's been a major topic. I know that the law enforcement gave a press conference and SCAR's given another press conference, and there's been a lot of discussion about the police changing how they respond to calls. And there's a discussion about how they can use force, and that's why they're not responding to calls. A big change also maybe that police now need probable cause for believing a crime has been committed rather than reasonable suspicion, which is a lower level of certainty before using force, not using the force, that's a different thing altogether. But you should do nothing differently. Again, lawyers will worry about the effect of these new laws in court later. Don't presume that you're now free to disregard instructions or leave the scene or do anything differently than you did before. Because again, that might be the thing that moves it from reasonable suspicion to probable cause and allow them to arrest you. What we would like you to do as your lawyers is give them very little to work with for charging you or escalating the situation. We'd like you to comply, be respectful, and be quiet. Okay, so this is time for discussion and any questions you might have from the chat or in the room. And deciding to those two, really talking about those two different main topics I talked about up front, that it's a question of your legal rights in the abstract, what you would learn in law school and what you would have if you got this case in front of a judge, and also then the decisions you make in the moment to keep yourself safe and your loved ones safe. What factors do you consider? And it's only up to what your personality is and what your goal is. It's okay to hold your ground and exercise your rights, even if this makes life harder for you. We need people to do this. That's often how we make change happen. You know, the Rosa Parks of the world, the people who will be willing to, at great personal risk, get themselves in trouble, good trouble, as John Lewis would say, because you're exercising your rights and you don't need to comply. So if they're asking you for your ID and you don't want, you know, they have no basis to ask for your ID because you're just walking down the street. I have people I know I admire very much who would say no, even though that means that they're going to get themselves cited and charged and have to deal with a legal case afterwards, because for them, it's more important to hold on that principle. But it's also okay for you to decide this isn't a good time to have this fight and to choose the path that is better for you. You don't owe anyone anything, especially if your safety is on the line or if you're going to work and you don't have time to deal with a lengthy police interaction and potential being arrested. You get to decide that for yourself. And what my point of this training is for you to understand that the take home is just get through it. Don't worry about being a good activist or fighting for the cause. You're not a sellout if you decide that you are going to not fight at this time and maybe fight down the road when you have a lawyer consulting and you have a legal lawsuit drafted. And that might be and that's the time that actually is more effective. And get through it as best as you can and exercise your right to remain silent and not to give them anything that might get you in trouble down the road. Okay, if you can go to the next slide, please. And you know, my points in these interactions is that the officers are the foot soldiers. They're the most public facing of a very powerful system of law enforcement that starts with our legislators and our presidents and governors and mayors and police chiefs and sheriffs who have set these policies in motion, asking the officers to execute them. The officers are not decision makers, they're not policy makers, they're not the ones that are going to make the change that you want to have happen. That's going to happen at the higher levels. So having the battle with the person who's on the street with you is not going to move the ball forward, and it might just put you at risk. So I would suggest that you use the interaction, remember it, bring it to the organizations like SCAR and to a lawyer and to the ACLU and others who could then use this as another reason why we need those policy changes that are important. But don't decide that you're going to have a battle with that officer right then and there, because it's really not the person that you need to be talking to in the first place. It's like trying to have a conversation about education reform that needs to happen at the congressional level and doing it with a teacher in the classroom. They're just not the person that can make that choice, that they can't make those changes. And then on top of that, that interaction is being done with somebody who's very dangerous. Officers are, I think they would admit, they are dangerous people. They are given the right to carry lethal force and to use it whenever they feel that they're facing any threat to themselves. That's a big thing that you have to keep in mind. Their fear could mean your life, even, and might be after the fact that we can prove that they were wrong to be afraid, that they broke the law, they did not have a articulable suspicion of a threat to do so, and they might go to jail in a very, very rare situation. It might be a good big payout for you, or it might be a big payout for your family members because you're not there to see it. While we expect them to be the adults in the room and in control and well-versed in the Constitution because they're the professional who are used to these interactions every time, and you're the person who's not a professional and you're scared and you're anxious and you're so shocked by this is happening. And so in some ways you think that you should be allowed to be kind of unpredictable and anxious and maybe angry and volatile because this is new to you and you're the one that's facing the risk, and the officer should be the calm adult. It's just not the case, because while they are more used to those situations, they are also trained over and over again. They watch videos. It's in their first academy training that every interaction they have with the public could be their last. They all know the story about the new young cadet that pulled somebody over on a regular old traffic stop, and the guy pulled out a gun from the back seat and shot the cadet in his first week on the job. And that could be anybody. So be careful. And they know that someone could have a gun in the back of their belt and not take that chance. And they're told that their first and most important priority is to get home safe at the end of their shift. So if you recognize that they are not people who are going to stay calm when you're not, then it hopefully makes you realize that you have to just change your perspective on this and get out safely. Just do whatever you need to do to treat them as a loaded weapon and just get out safely. The next point is that lawyers can help you beat the rap, but not the ride. It's an expression from Jeffrey Feiner. I want to give him credit. You're the first person who told me that, a great lawyer in town I work with. So you might, if you escalate things right there, if you fight back right there, you might have no basis to to be charged with anything. But if you antagonize enough, they might still arrest you just to give you the experience of being arrested, stuck in the back of a squad car, be booked into holding, sit in a jail cell, be searched, all the humiliating things that involves with being arrested, and sometimes potentially physically dangerous if the arrest itself is rough. So try to avoid that if you can by antagonizing things. If you do get arrested, as I talked about before, how to get through that as well as you can, but just again, try to get to the other side so when a lawyer can get to your case, everything's settled down. The lawyer can look at your charges to see if they have any merit to it, see if they can get the prosecutor to dismiss it. If they can't get the prosecutor to do so, whether they can get the judge to dismiss it, and whether last case scenario, they can get a jury to dismiss charges. That's where you have some power in the situation. But you don't have any power until you get through to the other side of the police interaction. They have all the power. So your job is to, like I said before, be compliant, be safe, be quiet. And again, we can focus you on helping on the road, but just get out of there. Stay calm, cooperative, and quiet. Any questions? Sure, go ahead. Mike, please, to Claire.
So when you witness police brutality, the goal is that the person out and safe. What's the best course of action?
So this is actually a really hard answer to give because I can't give you the answer that you want. There isn't a way to physically stop the police brutality. The people watching George Floyd's murder for 8.5, 9 minutes feel very guilty that they didn't do more to stop. But the fact is, there was literally nothing they could have done. If they had done anything to physically intervene, they may have died also. There was 4 officers there. Going into the scene was just going to give themselves a basis for being arrested, restrained, and probably have a knee on their neck as well. I mean, in that situation, people called in, the call 911 on them. They actually were talking to, we had a supervisor down here right away. A firefighter was on the scene and she called it in saying, hey, we need help. A paramedic actually went to the officers while he was alive still and said, I think he's having a seizure. We need to give first aid right away. And that still didn't work. Someone with authority. There was literally nothing that they could have done. It's like medical malpractice. You can't stop the doctor while you're under, it's after the fact to find out what happened, but much worse because you have to, it's in real time and in that case it was malicious. It's agonizing to say this, but every lawyer I think will agree that you, if you're a witness, you just need to witness. You need to provide as much recording and documentation of this as you can to have justice and consequences and accountability after the fact, but trying to stop it at the time. I've heard some people say that what can kind of work is you can appeal to humanity. You know, would your mother be proud of you if you saw what you're doing right now? Would that sort of stuff that, you know, how would you feel if someone talked to your mother that way? That she could, you know, if someone's being arrested, that's somebody's kid right there. That's someone's dad. Those sort of things are maybe the things that could get through to persuade the officers. That's the only thing you can do, is to persuade them, perhaps. But as far as that goes, that's the only thing you can do. You can't actually physically stop them. There's laws now with the reform laws that are making it a duty for other officers to stop their co-officers when they see police brutality happening or any legal violation happening, which is somewhat hopeful. I still have questions about how effective that's going to be, because are they going to get into a physical fight right then and there? But maybe having an officer tap their shoulder and say, hey, get off, might do something. But at the time, we are in a system in which you're not allowed to fight back. And legally speaking, if you're being assaulted by a police officer, you have every right to defend yourself against anybody who's assaulting you, if you can prove it after the fact that, you know, this was an assault and not illegal use of force. But in the meantime, you're fighting against somebody who's got an advantage over you that you can never overcome. They've got better training, they're probably stronger, and they got weapons. And so you're most likely to be safe by not fighting back and making this and taking out any possible justification for using the force. I remember the question in 1 second before I get that about what to do if you're being sexually assaulted by a police officer, which is obviously a crime. And again, you have a legal right to fight back against anybody who's sexually assaulting or raping you. And But again, the balance of power is so extreme that from a practical perspective, the best remedy you have is after the fact, about getting documentation and getting justice and accountability and getting criminal charges once you get the chance to get to court, because getting through that safely is not going to get better by using force. They have more force than you. Yes, question?
Yeah, someone in the chat asked, what are your rights when drones are being used?
And drones are being used. What are the rights? What are your rights when drones are being used? Well, they're basically the same as you have any other time. Drones are not a novel, they don't change the constitutional rights that we have ordinarily. They are allowed, when you're in public, you're allowed to be observed. It sounds creepy sometimes, but as technology has gotten better, we've gotten, the surveillance state has gotten more effective. It used to be that in the olden times, you could be tailed by somebody. People wouldn't know it, but they'd have somebody watching them with a camera all day long in a inconspicuous location. And that was allowed. That was permitted. You're out in public and you're allowed to be observed by whoever wants to be. They don't need a warrant or anything. Since the advent of security cameras and such, now they can see you. They don't need to tail you. They can use street cameras. They can use ATM cameras. They can put a GPS on your car. They can do all those sort of things. Other than you being in your home, they can't look into your home. That's the one safe place you have, or any other private place where you're not in public view. They're allowed to do that. Drones are just an extension of the cameras that are on the streetlights. They're just farther up in the air. They could have watched you from a helicopter back in the old days with binoculars, which they've done. Used to be an old way of surveilling somebody from the sky, and now they're allowed to do that with the technology, as long as you're in a public place and observable. Yes, Justice pointed out they have very expensive cameras. They have technology that you wouldn't believe. The Supreme Court drew a line at one interesting case in which they were using heat sensing infrared technology to look at someone's house and to see that the amount of heat inside the house had to be from a marijuana grow, that there was no way that anybody else would have that much energy and that much heat. That was clearly a gardening operation. And so they used that as a basis for a warrant to search, and they did in fact find a bunch of marijuana plants. And the Supreme Court said that's too far, because now you're using beyond the naked eye, kind of going through the walls to see someone into someone's house, what the heat is like. That was too far. But they're allowed to stand on the street and watch you and see what's going in and out of your house and look through your garbage and all those other things. So the rights that you have are protected in your own castle, but they go down dramatically once you're out in the world. I had a case I litigated, or at least watched, when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, of a guy who discovered that there was a GPS stuck to his bumper. The wire came down. They're tracking him for about a month, and he took it off, and could have destroyed it before he knew what was going on, but he decided to keep it. And then eventually the cops came and said, "We'd like our GPS system back, please." And he said, "Hell no, I don't have to give it back to you." And they had a warrant though. They put it there. They had a legal right to do it, and he had to give it back to them because it was their property once they asked for it. And by not giving it back, they then had probable cause for theft of government property. And that gave them a basis for a search warrant for his entire house, where they found all the other legal stuff he was doing. And he was much better off to just give him back the GPS device. So the police have a lot more power than you might think. And I give this training to, number one, for safety, But number two, I think we are sometimes under the misimpression that that the police can't do things and that we're allowed to fight back because we're in the right. And it's actually maybe even more important to know about the rights that you don't have than the rights that you do have. The rights that you do have is a pretty short list. Right to remain silent. And there's not much beyond that. The rights you don't have are, you don't have the rights to walk away. You don't have the rights to say no. You don't have the rights to fight back. All those rights are given in those interactions. The police are given the authority in that situation because of the idea that they have to control it. They have to be the arbiters of what's going on right there. And you have to just comply with that. It's one of the things in our social contract. If you're ever angry at that or frustrated with that, the justification for it is you have to think about this not just in your situation in which you are a mild-mannered, safe person. The rules are written under the idea that you may be a exceptionally dangerous criminal who's got both amazing martial arts skills and a weapons master who's going to hurt the police officer who's just trying to do their job. And so in that situation, you'd want to, of course, give the police officer all the tools to protect themselves. And to investigate you and to do the things that they need to do to protect public safety. And so that's why those rules exist and why you are not allowed to violate them, even though in your situation, you are not posing a threat. That's the reasoning. Next question.
So we have at least one question that someone would prefer to ask off recording. So I'm going to ask you sort of this last question for our full audience before we cut.
Okay.
And then we can continue talking to folks.
Sure.
But first, thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure. Big crowd, thank you. There's really a wave now. That's amazing.
Points that you emphasized quite a bit was that there isn't much to be gained by physically fighting the police. What do you say to the activist, the person of their history who says, wait, but like Stonewall was literally a right against police. It kicked off the entire civil rights movement because people were throwing bricks and de-arresting people and dragging people out of paddy wagons, etc. Or if you want to look more recently, people who talk about, physical resistance against police in, against evictions or, other circumstances where physical force has been a tactic. How do you engage that argument?
Sure. Well, first I'll point out that's very rare. Those stories stand out as big historical moments, and people are lionized and are heroes for a reason, because that's so uncommon for that to succeed, and to not have it be a horribly tragic event in which we talk about the Stonewall massacre of people who were killed by the police after they got violent, and so there's just that reality of it. I don't want to advocate anytime ever using violence. I know in Stonewall and other situations, it was so egregious and it was so violent already that people used self-defense. And that is legally justified. Again, you are legally justified to use self-defense if someone is arresting you without legal basis or hurting you without legal basis, including against police officers. My point is, can you do that safely? And the element in those situations are, do you have the numbers, in an eviction? Or is it something where if it's just you, and maybe you and a friend against 2 officers or 3 officers, even 1 officer who has a better training than you, the odds are definitely not in your favor. And the benefits of doing that are so limited that they practice this stuff on a regular basis, a whole entire training program about hand-to-hand combat and close combat quarters and how to do restraint maneuvers and to get someone into a physically compliant position. They do weapons training. They're not someone to be trifled with. And when a community comes together and has numbers, then the police have to respect that more because they recognize that this is a unsafe situation for them, that force won't work in that situation. But if you are just being arrested by yourself or with somebody else, even if it's a bigger group, they've got guns. And I don't want to ever give someone the advice to get in a physical confrontation with somebody with a gun. So I know that it's happened in the past in truly remarkable situations. But if you're doing that, and I think that's what makes so heroic about the people at Stonewall and other situations, that they did that knowing they might die as a result, and they did it anyway. And that's why they deserve the place in history that they have. But I don't want to give someone the advice to do something that might make them die. So I'd rather you get out alive and bring a big lawsuit that gets a lot of media attention and lets everyone see what happened to you and get some justice in the courts and hopefully some policy changes to make it not happen to somebody else. And that's the way that you can make change without having to suffer as much as the people that we've seen lose their life so far too frequently.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And with that, I'm going to end this